Hi, I'm Daniel, founder and CEO of Liquid Trees. Today I would like to talk to you about a special type of tree that you probably haven't heard about. It's microscopic. You can only see it by definition under a microscope, and it produces half of the oxygen that we all consume here in the room. The issue with traditional trees for stopping climate change, for carbon sequestration, is that trees only temporarily capture carbon. So they basically at some point die and decompose. You'd have to take it and bury it in order to permanently sequester the carbon and get it out of the cycle. The cool thing about some microalgae, not all, there's a million different types, is that they capture carbon by photosynthesizing, by growing, and then they start sinking into sediments, so they capture and sequester carbon. Right now, there's a lot of money going into trees, and we all like trees, we hug trees, we protect trees, we protest for trees, but we almost not recognize liquid trees in our daily life, and they do grow in lakes, rivers, mostly in the ocean. Earth is 70% water, so there's a lot of them out there. So when I looked into carbon removal technologies 2 years ago, I basically multiplied the cost times 10 billion. That's the amount we have to remove by 2020 if we achieve our avoidance and reduction targets, which we won't. So probably it's like 15 to 20 billion that we have to remove on an annual basis. And if you look into direct air capture or into macroalgae or into planting trees, none of these technologies really scale on a cost basis, or there's not enough land. If you would want to grow trees and impact the climate, I don't know, you'd need like 15, 20 times the size of Australia. We don't have that land available, but there's a lot of water available. So Earth is 7% water. Algae do not require much space. They grow in the water, and then they sink into sediments and store carbon there. So it seemed to me like the most scalable technology, and climate change is all about scale. So we focus on a certain type of microalgae. In English, they're called Diatoms, and in German, it's a Kieselalge. And what makes them special is that they have a silica cell wall. You can see it here in green around them. And that silica cell wall makes it ultimately heavier or denser than water. So those algae clump together and sink. It's a little bit like sand. So a single piece of sand typically doesn't sink, but many pieces of sand, if you play around with them on the beach, collectively sink quite effectively. So what we do is we identify native species. So we do not modify them genetically in any way. We basically take a water sample, extract them, look at what type of diatoms are available natively in a river, and then we start cultivating them in our own raceway ponds and increase their population. So you can think about mostly diatoms are the minority right now in rivers, and we want to make them the majority. So right now it's maybe 1 in 100 microalgae is a diatom, and that needs to grow to 80, 90, make them dominant, and allocate all the nutrient supply towards diatoms rather than other types of algae, for example, green algae or blue-green algae that sometimes are harmful for the environment. So what happens once we produce this initial kilogram of diatom, they continue to grow. So we produce ourselves a kilogram, and then that 1 kilogram grows into 1,000 kilogram by basically multiplying, by growing at a rate of like around doubling per day, per 24 hours for a few days. And you can see a little bit under the microscope here what happens if they get to a very high density. It kind of looks like sand. And then they start sort of sinking latest when fresh water hits salt water in the estuary of a river. Building those plants isn't that costly, but they produce like long-term revenues in terms of carbon credits. It's an initial upfront cost, but then they basically run themselves. On the left side, you see accumulated microalgae, and on the right side, what happens when they get to the right density and start sinking and start removing excess fertilizer and excess carbon. Both are pollutants for ecosystems, and both harm the population of fish. And it's really important to recognize that some microalgae are edible for zooplankton, and zooplankton get eaten by fish. So some are fish positive and some are fish negative. And in our systems, we can control that we only grow the kind of microalgae that is fish positive, and the fish population, the oxygen production is increased and the carbon is decreased. Once they start hitting sediments, you basically see an increase of carbon content in the sediment. And anyone who can audit our data, so if you take a sediment probe, you can just look into the increase of carbon content. The interesting part of the history of microalgae is, in some ways, they are responsible for the current climate crisis, because 50 to 100 million years ago, a lot of them deposited on sediments and started mixing with sediments into oil. So when we drill for oil today, and that carbon dioxide is released, that is basically transported from microscopic algae. So in some abstract ways, we are producing future oil, and we're bringing that future oil back underground together with the needed carbon removal. On the left, you see a typical blue-green algae bloom. So that's the kind of algae that suffocates fish. You shouldn't go near any of these algae. So especially in summer in Europe, they can produce neurotoxins like BMAA, which triggers Alzheimer's or ALS. On the right, you see basically like a typical sort of diatom bloom. Looks like normal water, perfectly safe, much healthier, much cleaner. Higher oxygen content, all around good. Our pollutant removal credits have multiple pollutants that we are removing. We operate in countries that have a lot of agricultural production, so too much nitrogen and phosphorus. Farmers tend to over-fertilize by ratio of 1 to 5. Some heavy metals and microplastics are also captured by microalgae, and obviously most important for the climate crisis, carbon removal. You can, if you're a customer of ours, you'll get a QR code to some satellite data so that you can live track your algae from space to chlorophyll data, and then later you'll get some sediment that shows, with the GPS coordinate, that shows where the carbon, where your diatoms that you have purchased are stored in sediments. We right now operate mostly around Southern Asia and plan to scale out across the globe. The cool thing is we operate in rural areas where there's a lot of farmland, where we can create a lot of jobs, where typically there's a high degree of unemployment. The most exciting vision of our operations is the scalability, so we can scale to rivers, lakes, coastal areas, and to the open ocean. And if you add up all of that, you can remove between like 15 to 20 gigatons annually. And if you think about the total global excess nitrogen supply, that's around 60 million tons, and that can be allocated towards the right type of microalgae rather than the harmful one. We really need to scale fast. Right now, the industry is removing roughly 100,000 tons annually, and that has to grow to at least 10 billion tons. So it's a massive annual growth, which right now is like super slow. And I believe it cannot be achieved technically with direct air capture or any sort of industrial carbon removal methodology, which needs energy input, which needs a lot of land. I think it has to be done in nature, and microalgae will play a huge part of that amount. We are a team of mostly scientists. I'm the only idiot without any PhD. We have like competent teams running sites across the entire world. We're also hiring, so if you know some talented adventurers who want to move to exotic countries like India, more welcome to talk to me. We like to stick together, like to do some exciting stuff when we're not working, and hopefully we can scale this as soon as possible, maybe with your operational or maybe financial support if you want to meet your net zero targets by buying a little bit of carbon removal credits from us. Thank you.